Hey,
Hey, Dana.
how's it going?
Good. It's so good to see you both.
You too.
Yeah, nice to see you.
I think the last time was at Splice when we were all dancing with Kyle.
Very true.
Yeah.
Truly one of the last things in the before times.
For me, it was, I think I had one, like a couple of Splinter concerts like immediately after that. And that was the last thing that's actually was the last live music I've done since so late February for me at least. So, are you both doing okay?
Yeah, hanging in there. Lots of screen time. Trying to adjust to that, but it's. I also started a new job this way, so that's a little strange, but it's going really well. So
hmm
That's
Yeah,
great. Noah, are you still in Ohio or did you actually do the move?
I have not moved.
You're nearby.
Yeah, if you want
Oh
to meet
my gosh.
outside,
We should. Oh, that's so good to know. Maybe like we should plan a meetup. I would love to
yeah, we
see
can
more.
improvise in the woods before it gets too cold.
You know what? I have not played with another human since late February, so I would love to improvise with you by all means. And the woods sound like a beautiful place to play.
Sounds good.
And
yeah.
Kyle, how about you?
We're almost entirely online. Everything that I'm doing is online. So working from home here in Roanoke and,
Yeah.
making our way. This is
Yeah.
the end of week 4 for us.
Oh, okay, so you've been in it for a little while.
Have you started school yet at Oberlin?
Yeah, we're at the end of week 2.
hmm
So, and this was the first week of having some in-person classes. So we're like a very much hybrid. Like all the stuff that I'm teaching is all this semester, all online. So like all the classes that have larger class sizes are all like required mandatory online. So like all music theory and history and all that's all online. And then in-person lessons and stuff is kind of up to the teacher and how comfortable they are. Like they have tons of the shields and all that. And it kind of depends on the comfort level of the individual professor. So some of them are definitely just teaching online and some of them are feeling comfortable enough to have in-person lessons. And we do also have some outdoor spaces that people are using. And they just actually, the first performance that I'd seen since March was last Friday. We had a contemporary music ensemble performance of that John Luther Adams piece, Sela, which is the sort of outdoor droney microtonal piece. And it's actually kind of perfect for right now because everybody was spread out outside and walking in and out of spaces, and everybody was easily able to be spread apart. So it was kind of a nice, and very John Luther Adams sort of therapeutic kind of droney music. So they're trying to figure out those types of things to keep going. So, but it's
What are you teaching this semester?
yeah, this semester is just professional development. Actually, no, I'm teaching professional development for musicians, and then I have a private reading with a student that's a advanced improvisation private reading. So that's just an individual one-on-one with a student. Yeah. So yeah, it's could be better, but I'm not complaining because I have a job and I feel very grateful that I have a job. So yeah.
Very
I
true.
hear that.
So I'd love to jump in and sort of take us back to the beginning of your improvisation career and ask also, why you wanted to study abroad, to study improvisation. And then I'll have probably more questions, and Kyle might as well, about just your studies there and how it all started.
Yeah, sure. So I was very fortunate to get a Fulbright to go study in the Netherlands. I lived in Amsterdam for 3 years. And my Fulbright was not actually specifically for improvisation. It was a two-part proposal where I was working with this Dutch bassoonist named Alban Wesley, who's actually the one of the co-founders of the Califax Reed Quintet, which is the original reed quintet of the world. And I was a big fan of what he did and Califax. And so I put together a proposal really just to study contemporary bassoon repertoire with him. That was like one half of the Fulbright proposal. And the other half was then to be involved to some degree in the improvised music scene. And so I had put together some, there are a handful of regular workshops that happen like at the BIM House, which is their main jazz venue, jazz and progressive jazz and all that. And so that was sort of the start of it. So during my Fulbright year, I was able then to meet with a lot of the players in the Dutch music scene. And I certainly began improvising with a lot of musicians there. I think there's an openness that I really felt very comfortable being a part of, in that they would just open their arms to you and invite you to their homes to have an afternoon session where you improvise together and have tea or something, So, and I think that prior to moving to Amsterdam, so I was coming out of a master's program at New England Conservatory. And so that's where I really started getting interested in improvised music. And I actually started playing in some of the contemporary improvisation ensembles at NEC. So that's how I got connected with Joe Morris, with Anthony Coleman, and so that really started to pique my interest in improvisation. And it gave me some clarity that I could actually do that as a bassoon player. And so when I moved to Amsterdam, then I really wanted to continue exploring improvisation in that manner. And it wasn't until my second year there that I actually really took it very much more seriously. And, I ended up getting another grant from the Dutch government that I, ended up subsequently getting another master's degree in improvised music that was attached to an institution over there. But basically working with, some of the improvisation mentors who I consider to be the people who really helped me build my foundation of who I am now as an improviser. So a lot of it was, just being out regularly, going to sessions, just actively attending concerts. I remember feeling once, like at the end of a 2-week period, I think I had gone out every single night to some kind of event, some type of, whether it was a classical contemporary performance or a improvisation performance or whatever, there was a dance performance, something. I went through this like 2-week period where it was like every single night I was at an event. And I think that type of mentality really helps me to meet a lot of people, really helps me to sort of see it in action, to see it in a professional context, and really helps me to connect with the community in a way that was really important for me at the time, especially coming out of, my experience at NEC was certainly positive in the CI department, but it was maybe less so in the classical division, partly because I was struggling to figure out what I wanted to do and how I wanted to, be a professional, how I wanted to exist in the world, basically, as a musician. And so being a part of that community in Amsterdam that really opened their arms up to me, that really believed in me and supported me, whether through actually meeting up with me and doing sessions or teaching me with lessons, things like that. It was a really important period in my time as an improviser.
Where were these concerts at around Amsterdam?
So Zal 100 is one of the main spaces for Zal 100 has two venues as a part of it. One is a sort of main space and one is a smaller, they call it a jazz club. And the smaller space, every Tuesday night, and still every Tuesday night, they have a sort of open improv session where it's just a sort of first meeting kind of session. And so every Tuesday night it's 100, that would be a thing. Overton 301, which is another of my favorite venues. These are both spaces that I believe were squat venues. So squatting for a long time was legal in the Netherlands. And so for some of these spaces, there's that sort of kind of underground edgy culture to it that I love. And so Overton 301, Zal 100, those were the, I think, main places that I would go. And then the Netherlands is great for to be a student because you get discounts for everything. And so I had like a year-long discount to go to the BIM house, where I think you pay something like €90 to get, this membership card where you get into every concert that's, €24 and below, you get in for free. And then anything above that, you just pay like a small difference between that. And, so like it's super, super affordable. And so I would just be going to Muziekgebouw, to BIM House, Zal 100, OT 301. A couple other smaller places that would pop up here and there. But those were the places that I was going to.
That's awesome. I'm curious to know like what some of the moments are during your experience there, or like during your time in Amsterdam, that you still think about and that were really important to your development, or where it sort of gave you this aha moment where, things that you might still think about and that still affect you.
So the structure of my lessons was definitely something that I was not used to. So when I was actually studying improvisation, I should clarify that for some of those teachers, it really meant just that we would meet once a week and play for like 2 hours straight. And that kind of, together with my mentor. And so that type of playing, I think, really is super helpful. I think, that type of lessons is really, those are super helpful and impactful as a, emerging improviser and emerging performer. So certainly some of those with Vilbert, one of my teachers is, I am biased, but I think he's the best bass player on the planet, is Vilbert Diota. He's insane. He's an amazing, amazing musician. And he's just like a very, very kind person, very wonderful, genuine human being. So we would get together and we would just have lessons, and our lessons would be these like 2-hour blocks of time where we would just improvise together. And like we would play, and then we would stop, and he would say, why did you do this thing here? Why did you do that thing here? Or he wouldn't say anything. It's like, okay, great, let's do another one, so that was the structure, I think, of those lessons was really important for me. Also, just playing nonstop for 2 hours, improvising nonstop for 2 hours with someone else. You quickly run out of ideas, which I think is important for us as improvisers, to run out of ideas so that you can really, start exploring. So that sort of structure of working with him was really important. And the other thing I'd say, as a sort of realization that I had, and this was actually with him as well, actually with all of my teachers, I was really trying to get to the idea of, I should clarify that as part of my improv master's program, where I had this funding to do to stay there, I was required to do this sort of thesis and this research. And so my thesis was really kind of about the pedagogy of improvisation and of teaching improvisation, and kind of about, what are these different approaches to improvisation. And from my ear, these were musicians who were playing within the sort of same realm of music. But they had very, very different approaches to it. And so I was super curious to explore that, to explore how do you, individually approach improvisation. And so Vilbert is really, or at least at that time, he was super curious about different sounds. And so he would be really about an exploration of sounds. And he pushed me to find as many sounds as I could find on the instrument. And, after having gotten my master's degree in bassoon, I was like, I think I know all the sounds on the bassoon. But I didn't. And I think that, it took this bass player to like push me to explore my instrument in a way that I never would have considered. And he really, he really just pushed me to find a bigger range for my horn. And he didn't know what to tell me because he wasn't a bassoonist. And, you know, I'd read all the bassoon books and I knew what they said. And so I think that was important for me to put, you know, from his encouragement to really identify new sound worlds and new techniques. And for me to discover them myself, right? And I think that was a really important thing for a lot of improvisers is you know, finding these techniques and finding these sound worlds on your own. I think there's something very special about that, as opposed to a teacher saying like, oh, put this key down and then you'll get this sound. You know, I think that it's a very different learning experience. And so when you have that self-discovery and you explore yourself and you discover these things, there's a sort of empowerment and embodiment of those techniques that I don't think I would have gotten from having a bassoon teacher. And so I think for me, having those moments with Filbert were also really important for me to build some of my musical language. And then also just the fact that they would invite me to play on gigs with them, which I thought was also amazing, that it wasn't just us playing in our lesson sessions together, but then I would also, you know, meet him on the weekend and we would actually play a gig together. So I think having that experience where it's not just, you know, he's not just my teacher, but he's also, you know, playing a gig with me. And this is, you know, all my teachers. Frank Grotowski, the saxophone player, is also one of my teachers. You know, Walter Verbos, Michael Brahm, all those guys, they were very much like took me under their wing, which I was super grateful for. Yeah, and invited me to play on shows with them. And yeah, just again, welcomed me with open arms.
Do you do a similar kind of thing with your own students where you play a lot in lessons, or how do you give a private lesson on free improvisation?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the student. So I definitely do play with my students. I think that's very important because I do like that idea of, you know, I think that there's something to be said again where I don't necessarily think that I should be, you know, on this pedestal saying like, you know, do this or do that, or, you know, I liked what you did here, I didn't like what you did there. And there's certainly an amount of that you have to do as a teacher. But I think, yeah, I think some of those moments of actually playing with my own mentors were some of the moments that I've learned the most. So I do make a point to play with my students. It's obviously harder during the pandemic. So we're doing a lot of recordings. And also, you know, when I teach, it kind of depends on the context. I don't get a lot of private improv students. But I do have classes that I teach, and when I do the classes, I want to feel an equal in the cohort. Like I don't necessarily want to feel like you know, everyone has to obey the law of Dana or anything. But I want it to be like, I actually want to be part of the cohort with them. And I want to help contribute to the cohort in the way that I hope that they'll be able to continue after the class so that they can continue to build community, continue to support each other, and yeah, and just continue to be a cohort afterwards.
So when you've had in the past, have you had bigger groups than just, I know you've done workshops, I guess, if I'm wondering if you have sort of these go-to exercises. I know we did some at Splice a couple summers ago and you were the guest artist. I'm wondering if you could explain the difference between teaching private lessons one-on-one and what it's like to do group sessions with either a new group that you haven't worked with or with a group that you meet with regularly.
So usually when I'm working one-on-one with students, I try to focus more on how they can develop their own personal language. So for me, that is like, for me, when I was a student, that was something that was important for me to do. And there's a number of things that they can do to start working towards developing their own personal language and applying it to either solo playing or ensemble playing. Certainly solo playing is also, that's solo improvised music is maybe some of the hardest thing that you might be the hardest music that you could do. And so pushing them to be comfortable doing that type of thing, I think is also important. You know, and then comparing that to larger group settings, when I do workshops, you're right, there are a couple of exercises that I like to lean to, particularly that Pauline Oliveros piece, which I think is just a good way to have a group feel comfortable with one another and be connected to each other. So that is one thing that I like to do.
Can you just describe the Pauline
Sure.
Oliveros briefly?
Yeah, sure. So basically what we do, I'll have a group stand in a circle facing each other, and they will be holding hands. And what we do is I'll squeeze my right hand and say to the group, you know, when you feel a squeeze in your left hand, as soon as you feel that squeeze, you squeeze your the person's hand in your right hand. So basically we're passing that around the circle. And then I try to get them to do it as fast as they possibly can. So like as soon as you hear or as soon as you feel the squeeze, you know, immediately squeeze your hand. So trying to get it to move as fast as possible around the circle. Then you add this other component to it where when you feel, or I'm trying to, sorry, I haven't done this in a while, so I'm trying to remember exactly how I say it, is that then when you squeeze the person's hand, you also add a vocal sound to it that's usually an H sound. So it's a ha, a ho, or a he. So when you squeeze the hand, then everyone's going ha, he, ho, ha, he, and it can just be any kind of whatever they feel comfortable with, but some sort of HE sound. And that's super fun to do. It gets them, again, like loosens them up a little bit, gets them feeling a little bit more comfortable, and also gets them just concentrating on something together. And then we do that's the sort of intro to the actual piece, which is part of her, it's part of a longer group of pieces for, I think it's for orchestra, that are a couple different pieces, or for orchestra. And the first movement of this thing is that you do those sort of H sounding syllables, and you have these two types of people. One group is senders and one group are receivers. If you're a sender, you can send any of those sounds at any point. If you're a receiver, if you know, just as if you're receiving that hand squeeze, if you hear it, immediately when you hear it, you respond. So so I don't know actually if we can demonstrate this on Zoom, but for instance, Noah, because I know you've done this before, if I were to send you something, I could go, ha, and you would then, when you hear that, you would then respond with your own. So I'll do it a couple times. Ha.
Hey. Oh. Hey.
Yeah, exactly. So we do that in real time, and it's like super fast. There's no latency. And then we add some different parts to it. So then when you receive, you can also receive and sing a note. So you can go ha hee, ha hoo, you know, like, so you can have little, you know, elongated sections. And then the third movement, you add different components to it. You can do these glissandos down or up. So it's just a nice way to get people making music, doing it communally. And I think, you know, another thing about improvisation that I think is great about that piece is that I often think about improvisation very much as your own personal voice. And actually, one of my other teachers, Frank Rutowski, would often have me sing in my lessons. So actually using your voice and, you know, singing with someone else, and using singing as an improvisation technique, and then applying it to you as an instrumentalist. And I think that Pauline Oliveros kind of gets to a little bit of that too, right? So you're all still contributing, you're all still reacting, you're all still listening very closely, which are all elements of good ensemble improvisation. And so to me, I think that's a great way just to like get the group started and get going. Now I will say that when I teach my actual class at Oberlin, so I just started teaching this course called Approaches and Philosophies of Free Music. And that class, that's formatted in a way that we meet one day a week where we're just doing classroom, lecture discussion, listening. And then the second day of the week where we're actually in person as a group playing together. And I designed this class with that model in mind, because I think that what I often see are these improvisation ensembles popping up at institutions, but people will go through them and still not know who like the AACM is. And I find that really, really disappointing, because not just the AACM, but so many other improvisers and so much of the history behind it. And I think a really big part of learning and understanding improvisation is it sounds like such a basic thing to say, but just doing as much listening as possible. And so with that class, we do listening every week. We talk through the listening. We do like a lecture on some history of, people that have been really prominent in the field or who have really helped shape the field. And I already feel sheepish enough that I'm not getting to nearly as many people as I want. I mean, there should be an entire year-long course dedicated to the AACM, so I'm feeling sheepish that I can only cover them in a few, a handful of classes. So, but I think it's super important for students to know that, how the improvisation world has been shaped and who some of those central figures are who've helped shape that before they, you go off and become improvisers professionally, and maybe don't realize who some of these figures who have helped shape the scene are.
So as someone who has a degree in free music or improvisation, and as someone who's teaching that, what else, if I was to give you $1 million and say start a program, what other kind of things would the students study aside from an individual lesson and a group lesson and kind of the history? Are there some other, maybe non-musical things that would, you think, inform their playing in a way that would be helpful?
Yeah. Thank you. I would love to accept your $1 million to open my own improvisation school. Great. I think that, I've been doing, recently I've been doing a lot more reading about the AACM, and I'm just finishing up George Lewis's book, A Power Stronger Than Itself, which is insane. And really, I wish that I had read it 10 years ago. I wish that I had a better understanding of the AACM 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And I think one of the big takeaways that I've really come to, I think I sort of had established this, I had this sense and this knowledge before reading the book, but the book really clarified this for me, is that, so much of what the AACM has done and what they have built certainly includes improvisation. And I think that the public tends to associate the AACM primarily with improvisation. However, there are so many other components to the AACM that I think are equally as important to their development. So composition is one of those things. And I think that, so many of those members were writing music, bringing in music. They were, considered, not just improvisers and interpreters, but composers, visual artists, poets. They incorporated dance and theater into their work, all of these things. And, and I know that George talks a lot about thinking about, these sort of Eurocentric models of music and the sort of aphrological approach to music. And so I know that he's, coined those terms, Eurological and aphrological. And the idea of a composer performer is actually very much a European idea, where there is two separate things as a composer and a performer. Whereas like what the AACM was doing, you know, the entire embodiment of them and who they were as artists, who they still are as artists, includes so many more things than just either being a performer or a composer. It like intertwines those things. And I think that that is really, to me, a really important way to build yourself as an artist. And, you know, I know they were coming up with all of these, all of this work and all this pedagogy and all of this just really brilliant artistry, well before I think the sort of European centric model came up with their own idea of, you know, the Gunther Schuller idea that, the best musician is one that can be a composer and an interpreter and an improviser. And they were already doing that long before, but they just never received the credit at the time. So sorry, I don't mean to go into this like long-winded rant about the AACM, but just to say that I think that model of really, if I have someone that comes to Oberlin or where else, anywhere else, who wants to get better at improvisation, certainly composing is a really important part of that. I am shocked at the number of people who come into my improv class who are just completely not sure what to do when I tell them you have to write a piece for this group. And so I think like certainly having that, being able to perform other people's music, you don't have to be the most esteemed interpreter, but having those chops as well. And then certainly incorporating other elements like working with dancers. I found that to be really important for me. Amsterdam has a huge dance community, and a dance community that very often integrates with the music community. And so they have these dance music improvisation series pretty regularly that are really great way to think about improvisation in a physical sense, that I hadn't been required to do until I actually worked with dancers. So, really engaging with other forms of art, I think is also really a really powerful way to develop as an improviser.
So I'm wondering, over the course of however long you've been considering yourself an improviser or just starting to improvise, like if you looked back and traced that part of your career, how would you describe your evolution or the development that you've gone through? Not that it has to, not that you're putting everything in phases or boxes, but I'm curious, if you were to look back and scan through, if you can see points of departure, points of change, and just like a change in philosophy or sound. I'm curious to know more about that.
Sure. Wow, looking back at my life as an improviser. Yeah, I think I will say there are certain moments and points in my life that were a very clear shift. I think when I first was in the Netherlands, which in itself is a shift, because I think when I first went to the Netherlands, that was, my first year there. So it was maybe the first time that I actually started taking it very seriously. So that was certainly one point. And then I think probably might have been towards the end of my time in the Netherlands or right when I moved back to the States. There was certainly a shift. I think that prior to that, I had felt like I lived sort of these two separate artistic lives. One being that I, would perform contemporary classical music. I did all these commissioning projects. That's actually when I was in 2009, I think was when I led that commission of the Michael Gordon piece. So I was like still very much doing all of those very like contemporary classical music things. And then I had my improv life. And so I felt like they were very separate from each other. And I never really knew how they could coexist, how not coexist, but how they could somehow merge, and if that was possible for me. And I think it wasn't until maybe even 2013 or 2014 or so that I started to really explore ways that they could, you know, merge with each other. And so part of that was actually the Carve album was actually a result of some of that. And so that whole project, the Carve project, was really reaching out to composers who knew me as an improviser and who also knew me as just a interpreter, and commissioning pieces that included electronics, because I was really into, I mean, still into electronics, really still, you know, wanting to commission some solo works with electronics that included some type of platform for improvisation. And so that was maybe when I started to merge those two worlds together a little bit. And since then, that has certainly developed into more pieces that have done the same. So that have either had platforms for improvisation built into the piece, or that have taken some specific techniques that I developed as an improviser. So like, they're definitely very Dana sounding pieces, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And so for me, that was a big shift, I think, to actually be able to combine those two worlds. And now that happens a lot now, even with like my chamber group. So like Splinter Reeds, now we have like a bunch of pieces that are, you know, that also incorporate a lot of either platforms for improvisation for us as a group, or that have like sections within there that, you know, that really focus on some of our individual musical languages. So that was one big thing, I think, for me, a shift, a positive shift and progression from sort of leading these two separate lives, that it could really merge together. And now it's even more merging, because now I'm actually like writing my own electroacoustic pieces for myself to play and improvise on top of. So now it's like, you know, that other extra level where it's like, I'm not even doing that sort of contemporary classical Western music, you know, commissioning thing where you reach out to a composer and, you know, you work together and all that. Now it's really just this other thing where I'm just building my own sonic environments, electroacoustic environments, and trying to, you know, create my own ways of engaging with them.
How do you approach improvisation differently when playing with electronics versus playing solo, either with somebody or with somebody else? Or do you have a different way that you approach it?
Yeah, I think that there are, as part of my, part of the musical language that I have, there's certainly some areas of it that work really, really well with electronics. Like I'm grateful for my instrument because it somehow lends itself really nicely to electronic sounds. And there's a whole bunch of weird sounds that I make on my bassoon that maybe don't fit in as well in an acoustic setting, but work really well in an electronic setting. So some of those like really specific things where I can kind of, you know, sit in certain sound worlds more than I would feel like I would want to in an acoustic, you know, in an all acoustic ensemble. I don't necessarily think I'd play differently outside of that with live players, because that's a lot of still doing all the sort of ensemble. Like I know when I play with Sam Pluta, for instance, it's a lot of very much listening and reacting and you know, all of the same sorts of things that you would do in an ensemble setting. Playing solo, I think it depends on the context of the electronics. So I have done things where I've made sound environments for myself to improvise on, and those, I haven't figured out how to do that in a way that it's still completely free. And I think that there is certainly, if I'm making the sound environment, I tend to, you know, want to have that sort of composer hat on and think that, okay, I'm going to make the sound environment, and when I play on top of it, I'm going to like think about it in terms of maybe these different sonic areas that I can exist in. So I think it's more of like a guided improvisation than a completely free one. And I've worked with composers, for instance, who've made patches. Like I think actually the last time when all three of us were together, I was playing that piece by Taylor Brook. And in Taylor's piece, he has a couple different sections of his piece that are improv sections where the computer patches is responding to me and reacting to what I'm doing. And for those, some of it is like, some of it is a matter of actually just learning the language of the patch and learning how it interacts with me. And some of it is still, guided improvisation where I think that there can be a little bit more freedom if you're just, doing a sort of first time meeting with another acoustic instrumentalist, that you can just play and, create create improvisations together. So I think it partly depends on the context of the electronics. But certainly if it's live playing, I wouldn't play it much differently than if I were playing live with other acoustic instrumentalists.
How have you been creating your own patches lately? Or have you been making patches, I guess I should say, in Max or
Yeah, not
some other software?
no, I do everything in Reaper. I'm such a Reaper fan. I don't know. I used to do stuff in Max, and then there was a point where I felt like it was the learning curve. I had like hit the level of the learning curve where I was like, I'm not playing bassoon anymore. I have to like practice and stop learning this software. So I think for me, there's like a threshold. And like, don't get me wrong, I love working in with Max Patches, and I feel confident enough that if someone sends me something, I like know what to do. But in terms of like creating my own patches, I actually usually create things in Reaper. So that's been what I do, and usually I create um, the things that I've created so far have just been basically tape playback that either somehow, like I did this concert last November where I included a couple of pieces that were written for me by some colleagues, but then I also incorporated some of my own stuff. But I wanted it to be like a uninterrupted set. And so I created these pieces in a way that sort of merged the other pieces together so that it could just be this continuous set of music. So I've done things like that. I'm currently working on a piece right now that's a collaboration with a video artist who's actually also an incredible electronic composer. He's my colleague here at Oberlin. His name's Eli Stein, and he works in the Tomorrow department. And he's creating this beautiful video, and I'm creating all of the music to it. And the music is also going to be a similar, just a sort of tape playback that's created by a whole bunch of different sounds that I create and manipulate and go through different processings and filters and things. That is also combined with myself playing live, doing essentially guided improvisation throughout this 20-minute piece. So far it's just been that level of, I'm not going too far out of my comfort zone, because I think the other thing with if it's solo playing, I also want to be very aware with the sort of electroacoustic writing of the live component, and not to sort of overload with all these different layers of sounds, that there can actually be room to breathe for all of those different components.
I'm just wondering how your preparation for those pieces where especially if you're the one who's prepared the electronics for it, how practicing that and keeping that type of piece fresh is, how do you compare that to just practicing improvisation in general like when you're playing solo or practicing solo? And I don't know, because when I've played pieces like that have an element of improvisation, and I learn what the patch is going to do. I feel like sometimes it takes more work to keep it fresh and to keep each performance, spontaneous, and truly improvisatory. So I'm just curious what your approach to that is, since you've done a lot of that.
Yeah, I I agree. It is definitely harder to keep it more fresh and to keep it as spontaneous. I think part of my way to keep it fresh is to be doing the other type of improvisation as much as possible, where I'm just performing live with other people, to remind myself of, okay, Dana, you're like playing some of these things, you're falling back into these techniques that you keep falling back on, like push yourself to go in a different direction instead of like always doing this funny tremolo sound or this like funny, non-read thing, so like I think part of it is just like, giving myself, just being real and giving myself a check with that. And I think the best way for me to do it is to play with other people who are also improvising. Because when I'm just by myself in my apartment or whatever, then it's like, okay, I'm just going to be playing a lot of the things that I like to play. And that's not necessarily healthy. I think it's really good to push yourself and get out of your comfort zone. So a lot of that is just like making sure that I'm playing with other people and reminding myself of those things. The other thing is just listening back to recordings. So recording myself and being very real with myself about like, oh yeah, you're basically doing the same thing that you did like 2 performances ago. Maybe you can freshen that up, so just, being real with myself. I think there is, from my classical background, I definitely took the perfectionist quality with me, kind of in all aspects of my life, unfortunately. But I think that that's helped me to really have a critical ear as an improviser. And so when I do listen back to myself, most of the time I'm just like, that sounded like trash. That was garbage. What are you doing? Like, how can you, freshen up your sound, or how can you, get, improve a little bit or get out of your comfort zone a little bit more. So just like, being very real with yourself. I don't, I do think that some of those pieces do have a shelf life. Like, I think that some of those, pieces that have playback and improvisation, they do probably have a shelf life, and just being also very real about that, with myself. Like if I'm writing a piece that, I know in my mind I'm gonna play a certain way on it because I've written the electronics to sort of match that. Okay, maybe that's gonna have a shelf life then, right? So so just also being very real about those things.
What are some of your major influences? Like what inspires you?
Oh my God. Um, so much. Musically, a lot of things. I always and will always love Meredith Monk. I think that she is an incredible inspiration. She's the kindest human in the world. I love her music. I remember seeing her perform at Big Ears maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and I was straight like sobbing in the concert because it was just such a beautiful thing to see her perform live, and to see her, at that time she was already 70 or something, and just to see her still be doing what she does at that age. I don't know. I'm such a super fan of Meredith Monk. Also super fan of essentially all of the AACM. I mean, Roscoe Mitchell, I think is like a genius. I can't, I love what he does. All of the AACM members, just so inspiring. And also, I think that I I also really love just listening to a lot of emerging artists, and just my colleagues too. I think it's nice if you know someone, to be able to hear their music and to hear what they do. And it's funny because a student said that the other day. An Oberlin student was saying, I was asking these sort of icebreaker questions, like, what music are you inspired by? And the student was like, I'm inspired by the music that my friends make. And I was like, me too. That is such a good thing to say. Like, I don't think that ever gets old. So just seeing my friends, seeing my colleagues do really successful things, I think that's, you know, constantly inspires me. And then outside of music, I definitely, um, I read a good amount. And so I, for a long time, was really into fiction writing, into short story writing. That I think is like a really, for me, something that I tend towards. I love cooking. I think that cooking has a sensory element to it that, you know, is kind of on the same length of the sort of sensory unique things that I like my ear to hear. I also like to, you know, mess around with my sensory taste buds and explore areas of that I think are really fun and interesting. So yeah, and just, I don't know, these days, my family, you know, you know, being able to stay in touch with people. Um, yeah, I don't know. I'm in cold weather is inspiring to me. I feel like that's a terrible thing to say, but no one knows this. I remember telling her I'm like so excited about the cold weather. I love cold weather. That sounds like a stupid thing to say, but I feel like that definitely is, you know, the weather definitely impacts me. And yeah, I don't know. It does sound like such obvious things, but yeah, I don't know.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add? I mean, I think we've covered a lot of ground. This has been really, I mean, I know you and we've had some of these conversations before, but I definitely learned a lot from this.
Great. Yeah, I don't think I have much to add. You know, thank you for inviting me to do this. This is, I feel like feel very honored to have received the invite, and thank you. I'm not, I have to admit, I'm not a great speaker. I'm not a great interviewer. So thank you for, for helping listen through all my stumbly phrases.
That's great.
And I
Oh,
tend to,
thank you. We appreciate it.
okay, I do tend to, my brain tends to go faster than my mouth sometimes, and so it's just like, and yeah. But anyway, thank you so much, you guys.
Well, thank you.
I mean, Kyle, did you have anything else?
What are you working on right now?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so that piece with Eli Stein, that's going to come out. So he's creating these beautiful film for it. So that should that's part of Andrew Drury's Soup and Sound series. So Andrew Drury, if you don't know him, he's a fantastic drummer based in Brooklyn. He has this awesome series called Soup and Sound, which is a house concert series at his home. That's been going on for now maybe 12 years. And he had just received a grant from the Brooklyn Arts Council to host a series, set of concerts. And then the pandemic happened. And so he's sort of thinking how that can look online. And so this was also a good excuse. I was just going to do a solo improv concert as part of his series, but it turned out to be a really great excuse to work with my colleague Eli Stein. I had seen some of his film work at a concert in March that we had here at Oberlin, and so I had been wanting to, you know, connect with him and collaborate with him. So this was a great excuse to do that. So that'll be part of that series. I think it will be officially released online in early 2021. And then I'm sitting on a couple of recordings that I've made. So one is the George Lewis piece that's getting released through New Focus Recordings, I think in February 2021, as part of a composer portrait album that also includes his piece for Seth Parker Woods and for the Emergent piece for Claire Chase. And then the other album that I'm sitting on is actually a solo improv album that I made. I recorded in January, and I'm just, you know, just finished some of the editing and mixing, and we'll get that mastered probably at the end of this month. And we're working on a release date right now. So sitting on a couple of recordings that I'm gonna have released. Yeah, and aside from that, just teaching and trying to find ways to stay connected and to keep making music while I can. So.
Well, I'm really excited about your album, so I'll be on the lookout for that.
Yeah. Well, good luck for the rest of this academic year.
Same to you both. Thank you again. It's so nice to connect with you, and thank you
Thanks so much.
for the invitation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great to see you.